Hello, I'm Lucinda Jolly, a South African arts writer and an educator. This podcast is an invitation to discover how certain historical paintings, in this case Pablo Picasso's Guernica, are reimagined, reworked, reiterated. It's suitable for art enthusiasts, art educators, and students. The information in this podcast is adapted from my work, first published in the Daily Maverick Life section titled Reimagining Picasso's Guernica. The story goes that a Gestapo officer shoved his way into Picasso's apartment in occupied Paris and, pointing to a photo of the painting Guernica, asked, "Did you do that?" To which Picasso replied, "No, you did." It's so easy to draw a curtain, whether figuratively or literally, on the uncomfortable, the conscience pricking, if you're in a position of power. But it's impossible on both counts if you're on the receiving end. 18 years ago, on the eve of America's invasion of Iraq, the then US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, presented a case for war against Iraq to the UN Council. An invasion driven by an allegation, later proven unfounded, that Saddam Hussein had stockpiled liquid anthrax. Since its donation by Nelson A. Rockefeller in 1985, a tapestry reproduction of Guernica, woven at the atelier of the French artist Jacqueline de la Baume d'Urbach, with Picasso's blessing, has hung outside the Security Council chamber at the UN headquarters, as a perpetual reminder of the need for world peace. For Powell's presentation, workers placed a curtain in UN blue, obscuring the anti-war tapestry along with the flags of the council members' countries. The irony blazes even from behind the drawn curtain. The official reason for the cover-up was that a blue background created a more effective backdrop for television cameras. But art critic Peter Goddard wasn't having any of it. He was closer to the bone when speculating that the cover-up was the UN's realization that the image of the tapestry's anti-war directive would be televised globally, when it appeared as a backdrop to the interim report by Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix. But for the villagers referenced in the Guernica tapestry, or those Iraqi civilians on the receiving end of war, there was no curtain to draw. The destruction had such a powerful impact on one survivor that when faced with the carnage of Guernica, he lost consciousness. British Marxist Raphael Samuels wrote, "It is, rather a social form of knowledge, the work in any given instance of different hands." Samuels' quote refers to history, but it could just as well aptly apply to the remakings, reconstitutions, and reiterations of the famous historical painting, in particular Picasso's Guernica. The painting references a 2-hour strafing, which was a new military tactic by German and Italian air forces of an ancient Basque town, Guernica, on the weekly market day in 1937, at the time of the Spanish Civil War. Guernica in northern Spain was the center of Basque cultural tradition. The bombing is considered the first complete destruction of a civilian target from the air. And although some have suggested it was a bridge that they wanted to hit, but being unfamiliar with the new method of strafing, they weren't successful. However, at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, Hermann Göring acknowledged that Guernica was a practice site for the Nazi Air Force to sharpen their fighting strategies and skills. All the villages around the town were also bombed. The bombing was at the request of the Spanish nationalists under the command of the fascist General Francisco Franco, who would go on to rule Spain post the Civil War. Guernica had no strategic value as a military target, and yet ironically, the factory producing war materials outside the town and a bridge were both spared. Franco denied bombing Guernica. However, a secret report subsequently revealed that the objectives in bombing the town was to break the Basque resistance to nationalist forces. 70% of the town was destroyed, and a third of the population, that's 1,600 civilians, they were either killed or wounded. As Lyle Vertenbaker, author of The World of Picasso, wrote, "Never before in modern warfare had non-combatants been slaughtered in such numbers and by such means." So Picasso read of the bombing in a newspaper while in Paris, where he was working on a painting commissioned by the Spanish Republican government. And a month later, in response to the news, he began working on the new 11.5 feet tall by almost 6 feet wide painting called Guernica. Interestingly, Guernica started off as a color painting. Its stark, monochromatic outcome, a direct influence of the black and white photographs that recorded the painting's development. A pullback from the drama of the red, of fire and blood, and it was painted in the matte finish of ordinary house paint, not luxurious oils. This painting is considered the most powerful anti-war statement in modern art, and it was first exhibited at the Spanish Pavilion at the World's Fair in Paris in 1937. Its brief global tour helped draw attention to the Spanish Civil War. Activism was not Picasso or fellow artist Dali's primary drive. However, each artist produced one painting that could be placed in this category: Picasso's Guernica and Dali's soft construction with boiled beans, in brackets premonition of civil war. Yet Guernica, like Géricault's Raft of the Medusa and Goya's 3rd of May and Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, has been remade, reimagined, reiterated, appropriated and reconstituted by hundreds of artists, whether as spoofs or as serious artworks, like a dark gift that keeps on giving. Picasso himself reimagined Goya's 3rd of May and Velázquez's Las Meninas. It's also curious how many reimaginings are mashups of Guernica and the Raft of the Medusa. Take Jovko Savnov's Guernica 2015 and the Greek cartoonist Giannis Kalitsky's Guernica, which both reference the refugee crisis and war. The vote for the most prolific reimaginings goes to American artist Ron English for his 100 Guernicas and their wide-ranging applications from Snoopy versus The Simpsons Guernica to Fat Food Guernica. English uses Guernica as a template or a point of departure to comment on global corporate culture and war as entertainment and entertainment as war, with a kind of a pop surrealist treatment. English has a curious approach to the original Guernica, believing that Picasso's approach transforms incomprehensible tragedy into a cartoon narrative. Other iterations are Lena Gissik's 3D exploration of Guernica, a pixelated Lego Guernica, Robert Longo's charcoal drawing untitled Guernica Redacted, Picasso's Guernica 1937, in which the artist has imposed thick black bars on it as if to suggest the juddery newsreel of the past, or in fact prison bars. Dubé Spencer's Veterans Day painting, where the original Guernica features as a small painted reproduction on a sunny yellow bedroom wall next to a small photograph of American brigadiers who volunteered to fight in the Spanish War. Some of the most successful reimaginings are those created on fabric and often collaboratively. There's Sul Filo de l'Arts, which produced elements from the original painting in 3D knitted forms. There's a protest banner entitled The Remaking Picasso's Guernica, to be carried on protest marches created by a Brighton-based activist collective, which include the academic Dr. Nicola Ashmore, who has written and made films on some of the remakings of Guernica. The aim of the banner was to draw attention to historic and current government-led aerial attacks on civilian populations. Two of the most successful reimaginings of Picasso's Guernica are either made from fabric or incorporate fabric, and they both involve collaboration, and both are the work of South Africans. Goshka Moguka's installation The Nature of the Beast and the 5 Guernica tapestries by the Kaiskama Art Project. Both use the painting the original painting, as a springboard to comment on devastation and war. The devastation of war, as in the case of Goschka's, and the pre-antiretroviral devastation of HIV/AIDS in the case of the Keiskammer Art Project, particularly in rural South Africa. Goschka's installation, The Nature of the Beast, was first exhibited at London's Whitechapel Gallery in 2009, and it's made up of a number of elements, with a focus on the Guernica tapestry and the recognition of its ongoing power and extraordinary capacity to signify the suffering of many civilian populations from the Spanish Civil War to the Second Iraq invasion and beyond." Quote, unquote. Other elements include the blue curtains placed behind the tapestry in the same shade that were used to cover the tapestry, referencing Colin Powell's invasion speech, a black and white red war carpet which leads up to the tapestry, a glass-topped round table suggestive of the assembly room in the United Nations Security Council, and this displays archival material and a bronze statue of Colin Powell delivering his speech. One can understand why Pulitzer Prize winner for criticism and senior art critic and columnist for the New York Magazine, Jerry Saltz, regards the Keiskammer Art Project tapestry Guernica as one of the most successful reimaginings. It's currently on display at the Constitutional Hill in Gauteng until 2023 March, together with many other tapestries, and it forms part of the exhibition Dying and Rising of the Moon, as the Moon Does, celebrating the Keiskammer Art Project's 20th anniversary. The Keiskammer Art Project is known for reworking iconic Western artworks around the themes of despair and hope, and they include the 11th century Bayeux tapestry, which narrates our country's history and post-democratic elections disappointment. They include the Keiskammer altarpiece, which commemorates the lives of those who died of HIV/AIDS, which was inspired by Matthias Grunewald's 16th century the Eisenheim altarpiece, and the Creation altarpiece, which was inspired by the Ghent altarpiece. The 2010 Guernica Keiskammer Art Project is the first of 5 remakings of the painting, and it's the only one made to Picasso's original scale. First exhibited in 2010 in a sacred indoor kraal, the tone is one of rage. And then under that rage, deep despair. The despair of HIV/AIDS in the form of Mbeki's denialism and the disease and his government's lack of medical support. The Keiskammer Guernica is not a slavish copy of Picasso's Guernica, but rather a nuanced version, rich in cultural interpretation, a dialogue between 2 different cultures with a shared humanity. So the workshops for the Guernica tapestry began with a social worker who got the women of Hamburg embroiderers to draw their grief and their suffering, but using Picasso's Weeping Woman, a series, as a starting point. These, along with children's drawings of weeping, appear on the background as fine white outlines like tattoos of human suffering. The shattered flatness of Picasso's Guernica lends itself perfectly to a flat tapestry of embroidered cloth fragments, made poignant once one understands that the incorporated striped grey cloth fragments were once part of blankets that held the dying forms of HIV/AIDS patients, housed in a hospice which Carol Hofmeyr, the founder of the Keiskammer, started in an abandoned house in response to the desperate lack of facilities. The Keiskammer Guernica tapestries are the only ones where Hofmeyr appears. Her anguish howled to the sky, her arms raised and her head thrown back, surrounded by the bodies of children and adults she could not save. Embroiderer Nuzetti Makubalo stitched the Pieta composition of a mother with a skeletal child across her lap. And Nokpiwe Gedza, the woman wearing traditional Ibai and Imbako clothing, drawn from a photograph of women at a funeral. Artist Thomas McCartney created a version of what Picasso termed a sick sun because it gave out no light. He created it out of wire and replaced the lamp with an electric bulb. This concept was first introduced by the large lamp featured in Goya's 3rd of May. And the lamp in Goya's 3rd of May is described as a black light because it illuminated the horror of a mass execution of Spanish civilians by the invading French army. The problem of finding the right yellow for the sick sun was solved when McCartney agreed to sell his pale yellow shorts. So, in spite of the darkness of the subject matter, there were still human anecdotes which were amusing and tender. Stitched to the hem of the tapestry are rows of tiny metal plates with rest in peace and the names and dates of those who died in the hospice in Hamburg prior to retrovirals. These refer to the metal markers that mark each grave before a permanent gravestone is erected. Dr. Carol Hofmeyr happened to be driving past Motherwell, a municipal cemetery, when she witnessed the devastating sight of a sea of hundreds and hundreds of metal grave markers, all glinting as their backs caught the afternoon sun. There's no consensus about the meaning of the bull and the horse in Picasso's Guernica. Even Picasso wasn't clear. He vacillated between the bull symbolizing brutality and darkness and his work not being symbolic. Picasso suggested that it wasn't up to the painter to create symbols, but rather the job of the public and the viewer. But in the Keiskammer Guernica, the symbolism is very clear. The angry bull, the work of Seba Mvubu, known for his angry bovines, represents the lack of support from the denialist Mbeki government. The horse in the Keiskammer Guernica is replaced by a cow, sacrificed to appease ancestors and to ask for help. Embroiderers depicted the cow with a throat wound, its head thrown back in agony. Perhaps the most heartrending of all in this piece, and one which makes personal the agony of HIV/AIDS in the time of Mbeki, is the writing embroidered on the cow's body. Hofmeyr explained how it's the record of 4 cell phone text messages sent over a 24-hour period from a community health worker asking Hofmeyr for help for her dying brother when the ambulance did not arrive. And the last message read, "He is dead." Then there are the ochre birds that fly over Hofmeyr's head. These are symbols of the need to escape to another world, coupled with hope, always hope. On the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, 27 years ago, the Kids Guernica International Children's Peace Mural Project was born, an initiative of the Japanese cultural organization Arts Japan Network. The idea was to foster a global peace consciousness using child-centered peace paintings created during workshops on canvases the same size as Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Savina Tassitano, an Italian activist and artist, has been involved with Kids Guernica for 15 years and across the globe, and making of what she calls movable murals for peace and solidarity. Her collaboration with Ashmore and Team's Guernica remakings started in 2019. This year, Guernica, in partnership with the Keiskammer Art Project, visit Hamburg and Klebe, where 2 new Kids Guernica canvases were created. Now, this might seem a dark painting for kids to work with, but through a series of workshops, Kids Guernica encourages young people to draw from their own experiences and work collaboratively on the meaning of peace, using visual images to express their feelings. And the outcome is a movable canvas, but more importantly, the realization for these young people that they are not alone in their experience and struggles. And perhaps through their engagement in these projects, like these, new generations can lay the ground for global peace. For hope is a thing with feathers.